Hey there, macro folks. This is Mr. Hooker, and today we are going to talk about international macroeconomics, wrapping up the course. This should take us about 3 videos, so let's get started. So, first, let's look at the balance of payments accounts. So, a country's balance of payments accounts are summary of its transaction with other countries. So, just like you might balance your checkbook, a country has to balance its accounts, see what came in and went out. Um, so let's look at the U.S. balance of payments accounts in 2022, and these are in billions of dollars. So our sales and purchase of goods and services, um, payments from foreigners, $3 trillion roughly. Payments to foreigners, 3.9 trillion. So we netted negative 945 billion. Factor income. So these are payments to factors that produce something. So labor is a factor, capital is a factor, land is a factor, those kinds of things. So you can purchase land, you can purchase capital, you basically purchase labor, you rent labor, um, pay people, right? So $1.2 trillion payments from foreigners and payments to foreigners, about $1 trillion. So there was a net 177 billion dollars there. Transfers, these are just transfer payments. Um, Basically, think that net welfare payments. Payments from foreigners, 180 billion. Payments to foreigners, 356 billion. So 100 net negative 176 billion. Current account, which is 1 plus 2 plus 3, was negative 944 billion. Asset sales and purchases, these are your financial account. From foreigners, 1.5 trillion. Payments to foreigners was only 919, so we were up 597. Uh, so the statistical discrepancy, though, is negative 347. So note the statistical discrepancy is basically what the two, basically those two should be equal. So there you go. So row one shows sales to foreigners and purchases from foreigners of goods and services. Two is factor income, the income that foreigners pay for the use of American-owned factors of production, and income paid by Americans for the use of foreign-owned factors of production. And mostly that's investment income. All right, so row three shows international transfers, funds sent by Americans to foreigners, and vice versa. So money that people sent back home, things like that. Four shows net payments from sales and purchases of assets between Americans and foreigners, like Chinese firms buying U.S. firms and things like that. So the balance of payments on the current account or the current account is the balance of payments on goods and services plus net international transfer payments. The balance of payments on goods and services, just the difference between exports and imports. The merchandise trade balance, or what we call trade balance, it's the difference between your exports and imports of goods, but not services. Balance of payments on financial account, or just the financial account, is just the difference between sale of assets to foreigners and purchase of assets from foreigners. So investment type. In 2022, U.S. ran a current account deficit. So the amount that it paid to foreigners for goods and services, factors, and transfers was more than the amount it received. But it ran a financial account surplus. So the value of the assets sold to foreigners was more than the value of the assets bought from foreigners. Note. All right, so the note that this is kind of why the current account and the financial account must sum to zero because your sources of cash must equal the uses of that cash. So current account plus financial account equals zero, or the current account must be equal to the negative financial account. And this is why I was saying that's why that thing had a statistical discrepancy before. So the money that flows into the United States must equal the money that flows out of the United States. Excuse me. All right. So we have a little circular flow here. Um, inside payments to the rest of the world for in the blue, payments to the rest of the world for goods and services, factor income and transfers, um, and then payment in green, payments to the rest of the world for assets, and then from the rest of the world, payments to the U.S. for goods and services, factor income and transfers, and then payments to the U.S. for assets in green. So there that goes. So for a hypothetical economy, if the balance of payments on financial account equals negative 100 million, then the balance of payments on current account must be equal to 100 million. Got to zero out. So GDP, GNP in the current account. So for the most part nowadays, people don't look at GNP. When I was coming through undergrad, my first 3 years of school, we were studying GNP, and they didn't change the GDP to my junior year in college. So I ended up having to learn both GNP and GDP, which was frustrating as all get out. But whatever. So GNP is just one of those things where it is everything produced by a factor owned by a country. So if Ford has a factory in Germany and they have their own workers at that factory, um, and the factory was built 50% with German subsidies. So then the land is German, the factory is 50% German. The equipment, we have to assume that Ford purchased the equipment because they are a private company, not a government company. So we assume that Ford bought the equipment. So that means that the capital is actually all US. And then if they sent over, let's say, 20% of the workforce, then 20% of the labor is US and 80% of the labor is German. So then you have to break out all of those percentages on on the production of however many cars that Ford produces at that factory. And that tells you how much of that is going to be going toward the US and how much of that's going to go toward Germany. And so that was one of the pitfalls of GMP. GDP is just simple. Like, where'd you make it? I don't care who you are, just where'd you make it? So that's one of those things. So GDP or income is the value of goods and services produced domestically. So it shouldn't include international factor income and international transfers. So the profits of Ford Motors UK aren't included in the US GDP, and the funds Latin American immigrants send home to their families are subtracted from GDP. But gross national product does include international factor income, as I was just saying. All right. So a country's financial account measures its net sales of assets to foreigners. So a way to think about the financial account, it's a measure of capital inflows, foreign savings that aren't available to finance domestic investment spending. So what determines all of that? So it's basically loanable funds. What are the interest rate, and are your interest rates better than somebody else's interest rate, right? So we'll assume all investments are loans. We ignore the effects of expected changes in interest rates. Basically, we're just going to assume that everybody's operating in the moment. Okay, hit an easy button, ladies and gentlemen. Just stay with me. All right, so suppose the US has the equilibrium interest rate of 6%, Great Britain has the rate of 2%. Then British lenders will lend their funds to US borrowers, and interest rates will fall in the US and rise in Britain until they're the same in both countries, and will both settle somewhere around 4. Okay, pretty simple to figure out. They're going to lend us money. Money's going to flood the U.S. market. That'll reduce that. There won't be enough money in Great Britain. That'll raise the interest rate in Great Britain. We will settle somewhere around 4. The financial accounts determined by the supply and demand for loanable funds. Why would capital be cheap in one country but expensive in another? A rapidly growing economy will offer more investment opportunities and higher return to investors than a slowly growing one. There are differences in saving across countries, so private savings and savings by the governments. So capital tends to flow from slowly growing to rapidly growing economies. So in the real world, in real life, capital was moving from Britain to the U.S. from 1870 to 1914. So like the end of World War I. So the rapidly industrializing U.S. had a high demand for capital, while the already industrialized Britain had low demand for capital, but a ton of savings. So that's where we were. So the loanable funds model explained net capital flows. However, gross flows take place in both directions. Um, so why would it go in both directions? There is good reason for that to happen. Investors buy stocks in different countries for diversification. Corporations engage in international investment as part of a business strategy. And some countries, including the US, are international banking centers. So people from all over the world will put money in the US financial institution, which then invest many of those funds overseas. So the US, London, Paris, some of these major banking centers. So you got to realize that. So now that we know that that's how that worked, how do exchange rates work? Um, so price is what makes the two accounts balance. Price of money is the exchange rate, which is determined in the foreign exchange market. So really, when you're doing that, it's it's just another demand and supply model. It's just like chocolate is what I tell my students in class, right? So it's just like the model for the market for chocolate, except it's got pictures of people on it typically. So currencies are traded in the foreign exchange market. Exchange rates are the prices at which currencies trade. Currency appreciation is increasing the value of one currency in terms of other currencies. Currency depreciation is the loss of value of one currency in terms of other currencies. So here's a rate table for the dollar, the yen, and the euro. June 7th, 2023 at 6 p.m. So the dollar was worth 140 yen and 9 cents. I guess they use cents. It was worth 0.9345 euro. 1 yen was worth $0.0071 and 0.0067 euro. 1 euro is worth $1.07 and 149.92.92 yen. So there were the way those three were playing out. All right. Suppose the exchange rate is $1 to 5 Mexican pesos. If it changes to $1 for 10 Mexican pesos, then the peso has depreciated against the dollar. So this is a great place to stop. We'll talk more about exchange rates in video 2. We will see you there.